party to worship. Some fans in that crowd were moved to tears. Others were visibly uncomfortable and left. And within hours, the internet had split itself in half, arguing about what they had just watched. To understand why that moment carried so much weight, you have to go back to what it cost him to even stand on that stage again. In the summer of 2022, Bieber vanished from public view, and not by choice. He posted a video explaining that a virus had attacked the nerves in his face, leaving him unable to blink one eye or move one side of his mouth. Doctors diagnosed him with Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, a rare condition that partially paralyzed half of his face. He had to cancel an entire world tour in front of millions of fans who had already bought tickets. For a while, nobody knew if the paralysis would fully heal, and for 4 years, plenty of people quietly wondered whether he would ever get back on a stage of that size again. Then came Coachella. He walked out just before 11 at night in front of a crowd estimated at well over 100,000 people, and delivered a set that reportedly broke viewership records for the festival. Tens of millions of people tuned into the livestream within the first day, and by most accounts it became the most watched Coachella performance ever broadcast. Merchandise sold out. His music surged across streaming platforms almost immediately. By any commercial measure, this was the single biggest night of his career, the kind of comeback moment artists wait a lifetime for. And in the middle of it, he chose to spend some of that spotlight not on himself, but on something else entirely. Partway through the set, the production stripped down. The pyrotechnics and dancers disappeared, and Bieber moved out onto a small walkway stage pushed deep into the crowd, joined by only a couple of musicians. There, he performed a short, quiet track called Glory Voice Memo, a song that barely runs a minute and doesn't sound anything like a typical pop single. It plays more like someone alone in a room, reaching for something bigger than themselves, singing about giving glory to God. It had already been released as a gospel-leaning track months earlier, and now he was performing it in front of the largest audience of his life. That's where the reaction split. For a portion of the crowd, it was overwhelming in a good way, a rare moment of vulnerability from someone who usually performs behind a wall of production. For another portion, it landed very differently. Coachella is built around spectacle, escapism, and a shared party atmosphere, not a worship set, and a number of attendees clearly felt that shift and didn't want to be part of it. According to multiple accounts from people who were there, a visible chunk of the crowd turned and walked away during that stretch of the show. It's worth being precise here, because the headlines afterward oversold parts of it. Coachella did not stop. The festival kept running exactly as scheduled. What actually stopped was the easy, high-energy pop show feeling that everyone had walked in, expecting. In its place was something more raw, a famous man at the height of his career telling a massive crowd exactly what he believed, in real time, and watching a portion of them respond by leaving. When the song ended, visibly emotional, he told the crowd that he believes in a healer, and named that healer as Jesus Christ. From there, the clip did what viral clips do. Within a day it had been cut, reposted, and argued over across every platform. Christian commentators and outlets framed it as one of the boldest public declarations of faith a mainstream artist had made in years. Meanwhile, plenty of festivalgoers online said they felt blindsided, like they'd shown up for a concert and ended up in the middle of a sermon they hadn't signed up for. His streaming numbers spiked dramatically in the days that followed. Whatever people thought of it, almost nobody was neutral. It's also worth noting that this wasn't some out-of-nowhere pivot. Bieber has been talking about his faith publicly for years, through social media posts, interviews, and entire album eras built around gospel-influenced sound. What made the Coachella moment different wasn't that he suddenly discovered religion in front of an audience. It was the setting. A desert festival built on fashion, spectacle, and escapism is about as far as you can get from a church service, and putting an unfiltered expression of faith directly in the middle of that environment is what made it feel jarring to so many people, whether they were moved by it or turned off by it. Which raises the obvious question everyone online was asking. Was it genuine, or was it a calculated move by a massive celebrity dressed up as spiritual conviction? To actually answer that, you have to go back much further than Coachella. Back to a very different version of Justin Bieber, one who was falling apart in public. By his own account, in his late teens Bieber was using heavy drugs and, in his words, hurting a lot of the people around him. The whole arc played out under a spotlight most adults would struggle with, let alone a teenager. The arrests, the tabloid meltdowns, the constant scrutiny. He was arguably the most famous young person on the planet, and by most accounts he was struggling badly. In 2014, at a genuinely low point, he reached out to a pastor and asked to be baptized. Because of paparazzi attention, they couldn't use a hotel pool. So in the middle of the night they ended up at a friend's home, and Bieber was baptized in an ordinary bathtub. People who witnessed it have described someone soaked through and in tears, not performing for cameras, because there weren't any cameras there. That kind of moment, arranged in secret at 2 in the morning with zero press access, is not the profile of a publicity stunt. Years later, in interviews, he tried to explain what that shift in belief actually meant to him. He's talked about not trying to earn love or approval through good behavior, but instead accepting the idea that he was already valued before he did anything to prove it, describing his faith as something given rather than something performed. It's a very different framing from religion as a checklist of rules, and it lines up with someone who, by his own admission, knew exactly how far he'd fallen and didn't feel like he'd done anything to deserve a second chance. That thread runs all the way through to the Coachella stage, the addiction, the secret baptism, the public collapse, the 4-year disappearance caused by a condition that briefly took away control of his own face, and then a comeback bigger than almost anything in the festival's history. When he finally got that moment back, with every record broken and the world actually watching, he didn't spend it purely celebrating himself. He used part of it to say thank you, and the people he thanked went beyond his fans. In another stripped-down moment later in the set, his voice audibly cracked as he sang about the people closest to him, his wife and his young son, tying gratitude for his family directly into his expressions of faith. It read less like scripted stagecraft, and more like someone who genuinely didn't expect to still be standing there. The reaction from people who actually know him has been notable too. Fellow artists who shared the stage with him across that Coachella weekend have publicly acknowledged how far he's come, pointing to the years where things clearly weren't easy for him and crediting him with pushing through anyway. People close to his faith journey, including mentors who have known him since he was a teenager, have spoken about how much his walk has evolved over the past decade. None of that erases the skepticism some people still carry about celebrity spirituality in general, and that skepticism isn't unreasonable on its own. But it does make the publicity stunt explanation harder to square with everything that came before that night. So here's the fuller picture. A teenager spiraling on heavy drugs at 19, a secret bathtub baptism at 2 in the morning with no press in sight, years of public struggle playing out under magnifying glass, a virus that paralyzed half his face and erased 4 years of his career, and then a comeback that broke records the festival had held for decades. And at the single biggest moment of that comeback, he chose to spend a chunk of it not celebrating the achievement, but pointing somewhere else entirely. There's something worth sitting within that. Fame at that scale gives you almost everything. The views, the record-breaking numbers, the kind of audience most performers will never reach in their lifetime. And by most accounts, none of it actually filled whatever had been missing for him. He'd had that level of attention before, back when he was falling apart in front of everyone, and it clearly hadn't been enough then either. Standing at the top of a mountain that size and choosing to point the camera away from yourself is a genuinely rare move in an industry built almost entirely around being seen. That said, the people who walked out shouldn't be dismissed either. Some of them came to a music festival expecting a music festival, and got something that felt more like a religious service dropped into the middle of their night. That's a jarring shift to experience without warning, and it's fair for people to feel caught off guard by it. At the same time, there were clearly people in that same crowd who needed to hear exactly what he said, maybe more than they needed another hour of a party. Both of those reactions were true at once, inside the same audience, on the same night. Which leaves the real question, the one worth actually sitting with instead of scrolling past. When a famous person stands on the biggest stage of their life and talks about their faith, do you take it at face value, or does some part of you automatically assume it's calculated? It's a fair question to ask about anyone with that much visibility, and it doesn't have a clean, comfortable answer. Bieber's history makes a strong case either way, depending on which parts of it you choose to weigh most heavily. What actually happened on that stage in April 2026 is on the record. What it meant is still being argued over, and that argument